The Old Guard. The M1 Garand in Sergeant Jesse Porter's hands felt like a piece of history, heavy with both weight and memory. He never expected to be holding this relic from World War II during humanity's darkest hour. But as he watched the sleek Benzite ships descending from Montana's sky, their energy weapons disabling every piece of modern military hardware, he realized that sometimes the past holds the key to the future. All units, this is not a drill. Colonel Hawkins' voice crackled over the base's aging analog radio system, the only communication still functioning. I repeat, this is not a drill. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. Jesse sprinted through the underground corridors of Fort Harrison, the secret military installation hidden deep in the Montana wilderness. Around him, soldiers scrambled to make sense of the unfolding invasion. Every digital screen flickered to life simultaneously, displaying the alien admiral's face, a being that called himself Zor. His features were unnaturally angular, skin a pale lavender that seemed to shimmer under the harsh lights of his ship's bridge. People of Earth, Zor's voice boomed, the translation slightly out of sync with his mouth movements. Your primitive civilization is no match for the Benzite Empire. Surrender now, and we will be merciful. Resist, and face annihilation. Colonel Hawkins, a veteran of 3 wars with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, spat on the floor. Like hell we will. He turned to Jesse, his expression granite hard. Porter, get to the old armory. Section D, Sublevel 3. Authorization Code Romeo Echo Charlie 72. Our modern weapons are useless, but we've got a stockpile of World War II firearms. Time to show these aliens why humans never throw anything away. As Jesse raced through the base, the ground shook beneath his feet. Through the reinforced windows, he could see Benzite drop ships landing in the surrounding forest, their hulls gleaming with an otherworldly iridescence. He reached the armory and punched in the code, the heavy steel door sliding open with a groan. The sight that greeted him took his breath away. Rows upon rows of vintage weapons lined the walls, Thompson submachine guns, Browning automatic rifles, bazookas, and more M1 Garands than he could count. It wasn't a storage facility, it was a time capsule of human warfare. Private First Class Maya Rodriguez, the unit's communication specialist, joined him in the armory. Her dark eyes widened at the arsenal before them. Are we really going to fight aliens with our grandfather's weapons? Not like we have much choice, Jesse replied, beginning to distribute the arms to arriving soldiers. Our modern stuff is dead in the water. The Benzites used some kind of electromagnetic pulse that fried everything with a circuit board. But these beauties? He patted the wooden stock of a Garand. Pure mechanical engineering. No electronics to disable. Maya helped Jesse organize the distribution of weapons, her trained hands moving swiftly despite never having handled such antiquated firearms. I've got communications equipment from the 1940s in storage too, she said, pulling out vacuum tube radios. If their EMP knocked out our modern tech, maybe these will still work. Lieutenant James Chen, the unit's tactical officer, arrived with more soldiers. His usually pristine uniform was covered in dust from the base's partial collapse. Benzite ground forces are landing, he reported, accepting a Thompson submachine gun from Jesse. They're moving in formation, like they're not expecting any resistance. Then let's give them a surprise they won't forget, Jesse replied, leading the group to defensive positions around the base perimeter. Through his binoculars, Jesse studied the advancing Benzite troops. They moved with an almost mechanical precision, their armor gleaming with the same iridescent quality as their ships. Energy shields flickered around each soldier like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. Remember your training, Jesse called out to his troops, many of whom had only fired these weapons in basic historical weapons courses. These aren't like modern rifles. You'll feel more recoil, and the M1 Garand makes a distinctive ping when the clip ejects. Use that to your advantage, make them think you're reloading. Aboard the Benzite flagship hovering high above Montana, weapons officer Krall frowned at her console. "Admiral Zor," she reported, "I'm detecting anomalous readings from the surface. There appears to be organized resistance from the human facility." Zor's elongated fingers drummed against his command chair. "Impossible. Our pulse weapon disabled all their military technology. Send in the first wave. Crush whatever primitive defense they've managed to cobble together." Back on Earth, Jesse watched as the Benzite troops approached, their confidence evident in their steady advance. "Wait for it," he whispered, his fingers steady on the Garand's trigger. "Let them get close." At 50 yards, he gave the order, "Fire." The crack of gunfire shattered the mountain silence. Bullets streaked through the air, and to everyone's shock, they passed straight through the Benzite energy shields. Purple blood sprayed as aliens fell, their expressions of surprise visible even through their helmets. "It's working!" Lieutenant Chen shouted, his Thompson chattering as he swept it across the alien line. "Their shields can't stop physical projectiles." Maya's voice crackled over their vintage radio network, "All units, coordinate your fire. They're falling back to regroup." The revelation spread quickly through the human forces. These advanced aliens, with all their technological superiority, had never considered defending against simple bullets. Their energy shields, designed to deflect plasma weapons and laser fire, were useless against lead and brass. Colonel Hawkins' voice boomed across the battlefield, "Push them back. Show these high-tech bastards what Earth's primitive weapons can do." Jesse led a countercharge, his Garand barking steadily as they advanced. The Benzite troops, for the first time, showed signs of confusion and fear. Their advanced tactics fell apart in the face of weapons they had dismissed as obsolete. On the flagship, Zor raged at his subordinates. "How is this possible? They're using projectile weapons. Barbaric." Krall's fingers flew over her console. "Sir, our shields were designed to repel energy attacks. These projectiles, they're simply too slow to trigger our defensive systems." "Analyze those weapons," Zor snarled. "Develop countermeasures. We will not be defeated by these primitive apes and their antique arms." As the first wave of Benzite troops retreated in disarray, Jesse and his fellow soldiers quickly reloaded their weapons. They had won the first battle, but he knew the war was far from over. The aliens would adapt, develop new strategies. But for now, they had hope. Maya's voice crackled over the radio again, "Sir, I'm picking up transmissions from other military bases worldwide. They're all reporting the same thing: vintage weapons are effective against Benzite shields." Jesse chambered another round in his Garand, a grim smile crossing his face. Humanity had found its edge, hidden away in arsenals and museums, preserved by those who understood that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. The day of reckoning had arrived, and humanity was armed with the wisdom of the past. As Jesse watched his troops secure their position, he knew that the real fight was just beginning. The Benzites would return, but next time, they would face an enemy they had gravely underestimated, an enemy armed with the tried and true weapons of Earth's history. The first rays of dawn broke over the Montana mountains, illuminating the aftermath of battle. Jesse Porter stood ready, his M1 Garand at his shoulder, prepared to write a new chapter in human history with the tools of the old. Global resistance. 3 days after the Battle of Fort Harrison, Jesse Porter found himself in an unlikely classroom. The base's main hangar had been converted into a training facility, with hundreds of soldiers from across the country cycling through to learn the art of vintage warfare. The smell of gun oil and wood polish filled the air as Jesse moved between the rows of recruits. "Remember," he called out, adjusting a young lieutenant's grip on a Springfield rifle, "these weapons need constant maintenance. They're not like your modern polymer firearms. Wood swells, metal rusts, but treat them right, and they'll never let you down." Lieutenant Chen approached, his Thompson slung across his back. "Just got word from command. Operation Retro is going global. The British are pulling Enfields out of museums, the Russians are breaking open sealed SKS crates, and the Japanese self-defense force is restoring old Type 99s. Maya Rodriguez burst into the hangar, her vintage radio headset still crackling. Sergeant Porter. Colonel Hawkins needs you in the command center. The Benzites are adapting. In the command center, wall-mounted screens displayed news feeds from around the world. Colonel Hawkins stood before a tactical map, his face grim. Porter, we've got a situation. The Benzites have developed a new type of shield. They're calling it the Aegis Array. The main screen showed footage from a skirmish in Seoul. Benzite troops advanced through the streets, surrounded by a new type of energy field that seemed to ripple like water. When South Korean soldiers opened fire with their stockpile of M1 carbines, the bullet struck an invisible barrier several feet from the aliens' bodies and dropped harmlessly to the ground. They've modified their shields to create a slower-moving energy field, Hawkins explained. It can catch and deflect physical projectiles. Our vintage weapons aren't enough anymore. Jesse studied the footage carefully. Sir, look at their movement. Those new shields, they're consuming massive amounts of power. The aliens can't move quickly while maintaining them. Maya nodded, adjusting her headset. Intercepted communications confirm it. The Aegis Array requires so much energy that they can only equip their frontline troops with it. And it has a significant weakness, they can't return fire while it's active. Then we adapt too, Jesse said, his mind racing. We've got warehouses full of old artillery pieces. While their shields are up, they're sitting ducks for heavy explosives. And when they drop the shields to fire, we hit them with everything else, Chen finished, understanding dawning on his face. Hawkins smiled grimly. Get me General Marcus Steele at the Pentagon. It's time to implement Phase 2. Over the next week, the face of the war changed dramatically. In Europe, French resistance fighters used restored World War II-era resistance techniques to ambush Benzite patrols, striking when the aliens were forced to lower their shields. British Royal Artillery crews rolled out restored 25-pounder guns, their concentrated barrages overwhelming the Aegis arrays through sheer explosive force. In the Pacific, Japanese and American forces collaborated on an audacious plan. They restored dozens of old torpedo boats, their simple engines immune to Benzite electronic warfare. These swift vessels darted between the massive alien ships, their vintage torpedoes ripping through hull plating that had been designed to deflect energy weapons. But the aliens weren't finished adapting. Reports began coming in of new Benzite ground units, massive, heavily armored warriors who didn't rely on energy shields at all. Their armor was physical, designed to stop bullets, and they carried devastating weaponry. They're learning, Jesse muttered, watching footage of these new troops laying waste to a resistance position in Berlin. We need to stay one step ahead. The answer came from an unexpected source. Private First Class Tommy Morrison, a former history teacher turned soldier, approached Jesse with an idea. Sergeant, you know what we used against tanks in World War II? When we couldn't pierce their armor head-on? Jesse's eyes lit up. Shaped charges. The old bazookas, Panzerfaust, they didn't need to overpower the armor. They just needed to hit it in the right spot. Within days, workshops across the globe began manufacturing simple but effective shaped charge weapons based on World War II designs. The new Benzite heavy troops, for all their advanced armor, proved vulnerable to the same basic principles that had defeated Wehrmacht tanks decades ago. But victory came at a cost. Every day brought reports of fallen cities, of resistance fighters overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The Benzites still held orbital superiority, and their ships rained death from above with impunity. In the command center, Maya intercepted a transmission that chilled everyone to the bone. Sir, she called out, her voice shaking. The Benzites, they're calling in their main fleet. Thousands of ships, sir. They'll be here in less than a week. Colonel Hawkins gathered his senior officers. We've bloodied their nose, shown them we won't go quietly. But now they're done playing around. If we're going to survive this, we need something bigger. Something they'll never see coming. Jesse stared at the tactical display, watching the swarm of red dots approaching Earth. Then his eyes fell on an old photograph on the wall, B-17 flying fortress from World War II. "Sir," he said slowly, "what if we took the fight to them? They're expecting ground resistance. They've never faced old-school aerial warfare." "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Porter?" Hawkins asked, a glint in his eye. "Yes, sir. Operation Phantom Phoenix. We find every surviving bomber we can, get them flying again. The Benzite's defenses are all designed to stop modern aircraft and missiles. But old planes, made of canvas and aluminum, with minimal electronic signatures." Lieutenant Chen whistled. "They might slip right through their defensive screens. But how do we get them up there? The Benzites control near-orbit space." Maya removed her headset, her expression intense. "The Benzites use automated defense systems to track and engage our aircraft. But their computers are programmed to look for modern threats, supersonic speeds, electronic emissions, heat signatures. A formation of prop-driven bombers might register as nothing more than a flock of birds." Hawkins was already reaching for his secure phone. "I'll contact Allied Command. Tell them to start checking every aviation museum and private collection in the free world. We need every B-17, Lancaster, and 2, for they can find. And get me our best mechanics, ones who know how to work without computers." As the command center burst into activity, Jesse felt a familiar weight settle onto his shoulders. They were about to attempt something unprecedented in human history, taking World War II to the stars. The next few days would determine whether humanity's greatest gambit would be their salvation or their final defeat. The war had entered a new phase, and once again, the past would light the way to the future. But as Jesse watched the preparations begin, he couldn't help but wonder, would it be enough to stop the coming storm? Operation Phantom Phoenix. The Willow Run Aircraft Restoration Facility in Michigan hummed with activity. What had once been a museum was now humanity's most unlikely aircraft factory. Jesse Porter stood in the massive hangar, surrounded by partially restored B-17 flying fortresses, each one a piece of history being reborn for Earth's desperate defense. "It's incredible," Lieutenant Chen remarked, running his hand along the aluminum skin of the nearest bomber. "They built these things in hours during the war. Now it's taking us days just to get one flying again." Master Sergeant Anna Petrov, their chief mechanic, wiped grease from her hands. Her Russian accent thickened with frustration as she spoke. "Modern parts won't work. We're having to machine everything from scratch. But these planes, they're built like tanks. Simple. Reliable. No fancy computers to fail." Maya Rodriguez approached, carrying a stack of yellowed technical manuals. "We've got similar restoration efforts underway in England, Russia, and China. The British have 17 Lancasters nearly ready, and the Russians have gotten their hands on some old 2-4s. Jesse nodded, studying the complex network of chalk marks on the hangar's wall, their makeshift mission planning board. "How many pilots do we have?" "That's the real challenge," Chen replied. "Modern pilots are trained on fly-by-wire systems. These old birds? They're all manual control. No autopilot, no computer assistance. We're pulling in crop dusters, vintage aircraft enthusiasts, anyone who knows how to handle prop engines and manual controls." Colonel Hawkins arrived, accompanied by an elderly man in a leather flight jacket decorated with faded World War II patches. "Everyone, meet Colonel James Lucky Harrison, retired. He flew B-17s in the European theater. He's here to train our new crews." The old pilot's eyes sparkled as he looked at the bombers. "Never thought I'd see these girls going to war again. But we've got work to do. Your modern boys need to learn how to fly the hard way." Over the next few days, Lucky Harrison put the crews through their paces. He taught them the quirks of flying without computer assistance, the art of manual bomb aiming, and the complexities of formation flying in aircraft that required constant attention just to stay level. "You can't just punch in coordinates and let the computer do the work," he barked at a group of pilots. "You've got to feel the aircraft, understand her moods. These planes survived flak over Berlin. They'll get you through alien defenses, but only if you respect them." The training was brutal, and not everyone made it. Modern pilots, used to relying on advanced avionics, struggled with the physical demands of wrestling with manual controls. But those who adapted found something special in these vintage aircraft, a pure connection between pilot and machine that no modern plane could match. Meanwhile, the weapons teams worked to modify the bombers' payloads. Traditional bombs wouldn't be enough against Benzite capital ships. The solution came from an unlikely combination of old and new thinking. Dr. Elena Rossi, a nuclear physicist, proposed a radical idea. "We can't use modern nuclear weapons, the Benzites can detect and neutralize them. But what about the primitive atomic bombs? The kind used in World War II?" The idea was controversial, but the stakes were too high to ignore any option. Using original Manhattan Project documents, they began constructing simple fission devices, crude by modern standards, but devastating in their own right. "The Benzites won't be looking for this kind of radiation signature," Dr. Rossi explained. "Their sensors are calibrated for modern fusion weapons. These are completely different, and that's our advantage." As preparations continued, the aliens weren't idle. Maya's intelligence network intercepted disturbing transmissions. "They're bringing in something big," she reported during a late-night strategy session. "A weapon they call the World Breaker. From what I can translate, it's some kind of massive energy cannon." Jesse studied the intercepted data. "How long do we have?" 3 days, maybe 4. "Once it's operational, they can target any point on Earth from orbit. Our window is closing fast." Colonel Hawkins made the call. "Operation Phantom Phoenix launches in 48 hours. Ready or not, this is our only shot." The next 2 days passed in a blur of final preparations. Crews worked around the clock, making last-minute adjustments to engines, testing bomb release mechanisms, and running through emergency procedures. Every bomber was given a name, painted in vintage style on their noses: Liberty Bell, Memphis Rose, Steel Thunder, each one carrying the hopes of humanity. The night before the mission, Jesse found Lucky Harrison in the hangar, running his hand along the fuselage of the lead bomber. "Worried?" Jesse asked. The old pilot smiled. "Son, I was worried before every mission in 45. But we did what needed doing then, and we'll do it now." He paused, looking up at the massive aircraft. "You know what the Benzites don't understand? They think because something's old, it's obsolete. But some things, courage, determination, the will to survive, they never go out of date." Dawn broke over Willow Run as the first B-17 roared to life, its 4 Wright Cyclone engines coughing smoke before settling into a smooth rumble. One by one, the others followed, until the morning air was filled with the sound that had once heralded liberation for occupied Europe. Jesse stood with Maya and Chen, watching as the massive formation took to the sky. Each bomber carried a crew of 10, just like their grandfathers had in World War II. But this time, they weren't flying to Berlin or Tokyo, they were flying to save Earth itself. "Ground control to Phoenix Leader," Maya spoke into her vintage radio set. "All units report ready. Good hunting." Lucky Harrison's voice crackled back, strong and clear. "Phoenix Leader to ground control. We're on our way to make history. Again." The bombers climbed higher, their aluminum skins gleaming in the morning sun. As they disappeared into the clouds, Jesse felt a mixture of hope and fear. They had committed everything to this gambit, betting that the past could once again be the key to humanity's future. But as reports came in of the World Breaker's imminent activation, one question haunted everyone's minds: would this daring plan be humanity's salvation, or would it prove to be their final, desperate act in a war they couldn't win? The fate of Earth now rested in the hands of pilots flying machines from another era, carrying weapons from the dawn of the atomic age, about to confront an enemy that had mastered the stars themselves. Operation Phantom Phoenix had begun, and there would be no second chances. Thunder in the void. The world held its breath as Operation Phantom Phoenix entered its most critical phase. In underground bunkers across the globe, resistance leaders huddled around vintage radio sets, listening to the steady drone of piston engines climbing higher into the stratosphere. The formation of 64 bombers, B-17s, Lancasters, and 2-4s, represented humanity's last, desperate gambit. Jesse Porter stood in the Fort Harrison Command Center, watching radar displays that showed the vintage aircraft as faint, flickering dots. Beside him, Maya Rodriguez worked tirelessly at her communications station, coordinating with resistance cells worldwide. "Phoenix Leader, this is ground control," Maya spoke into her microphone. "You're approaching the threshold. How are the birds holding up?" Lucky Harrison's voice crackled back, distorted but determined. "These old girls are singing like angels. Benzite patrol craft have passed us 3 times, they don't even see us. Whatever Dr. Rossi did to mask our signatures is working perfectly." Lieutenant Chen studied the tactical display, tracking the Benzite fleet's positions. "They're completely focused on deploying the World Breaker. All their defensive systems are oriented toward detecting modern threats. They never imagined we'd come at them like this." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the command center. Maya's hands flew across her console. Multiple contacts. Benzite fighters on an intercept course. High above Earth's atmosphere, Lucky Harrison saw them too, sleek, predatory craft moving with impossible speed and grace. But instead of panicking, a smile crossed his weathered face. "All units, execute Operation Mockingbird." The formation of bombers suddenly split apart, each aircraft diving or climbing in seemingly random patterns. To the Benzite fighters' advanced targeting systems, they appeared as nothing more than a flock of birds scattering in fear. Their computers, programmed to track the heat signatures and electronic emissions of modern aircraft, couldn't lock onto the primitive machines. "Just like dodging flak over Dresden," Lucky muttered, wrestling with his bomber's controls. "Phoenix Group, form up on new heading 147. Martha's Vineyard, you've got our 6. The vintage bombers regrouped, maintaining their loose formation as they pushed deeper into space. The Benzite fighters, confused by their inability to target the earthbound aircraft effectively, fell back to protect their capital ships. Aboard the Benzite flagship, Admiral Zor received the strange reports with growing concern. "What do you mean, you can't lock onto them? They're primitive atmospheric aircraft." Weapons Officer Crowell's fingers danced across her console. "Sir, their construction is too simple. No electronic signatures, minimal heat output. Our targeting systems are too advanced, they're designed to track threats far more sophisticated than these." "Then target them manually." Zor roared. "Use your eyes if you must. They're flying antiques, they cannot be allowed to reach the World Breaker." But the Benzites had grown too dependent on their technology. Their gunners, trained to rely on computer assistance, struggled to track and hit the slow-moving bombers. Meanwhile, the human crews, operating entirely by sight and instinct, drew steadily closer to their target. "There it is," Lucky's voice was filled with awe as the World Breaker came into view. The massive weapon was larger than an aircraft carrier, its crystalline structure pulsing with barely contained energy. "All units, this is it. Remember your training. Remember Earth." The bomber formation split into predetermined attack groups. The British Lancasters struck first, their prehistoric bombs detonating against the World Breaker's shields. The explosions weren't powerful enough to breach the barrier, but they created crucial gaps in the energy field. The Russian Tu-4s followed, their crews unleashing salvos of unguided rockets that slipped through the flickering shields. The projectiles, too simple to be detected by Benzite point defense systems, struck the weapon's surface directly. Now, Lucky ordered. B-17 Group, this is your moment. Give 'em hell. The American bombers dove toward the damaged sections of the World Breaker, their bomb bay doors opening wide. Dr. Rossi's modified atomic weapons fell free, their simple fission cores invisible to Benzite radiation detectors calibrated for modern fusion devices. Time seemed to slow as the bombs fell. Jesse and the others in the command center watched through telescopic feeds, hardly daring to breathe. Then the void lit up with multiple atomic detonations, primitive but devastatingly effective. The World Breaker's crystalline structure cracked, then shattered. Secondary explosions rippled through its superstructure as raw energy escaped containment. The massive weapon began to break apart, its pieces tumbling into space. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Benzite fighters, finally adapting to manual targeting, tore into the bomber formation. Lucky's voice came through one last time, ground control, World Breaker is destroyed. I repeat, World Breaker is destroyed. But we've got heavy losses, we're not going to make it home. Tell them we did our duty. Phoenix leader, out. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she watched the dots representing their aircraft wink out one by one. The surviving bombers turned for home, but less than a third would make it back to Earth. In the aftermath of the battle, something unexpected happened. The Benzite fleet, instead of pressing their attack, began to withdraw. Maya intercepted their communications, her eyes widening as she translated. Sir, she called to Colonel Hawkins, the Benzites, they're retreating. Not just from Earth orbit, but from the entire solar system. What? Why? Jesse demanded. They still have overwhelming force. Maya's hands trembled as she read the transmission. According to this, they're calling us the ghosts of war. They say any species that can resurrect their dead machines to fight again is too unpredictable to conquer. We've scared them, sir. Really scared them. Lieutenant Chen let out a low whistle. They thought technology made them invincible. Instead, our grandfathers' weapons proved to be their undoing. As celebrations erupted around the world, Jesse stood quietly, thinking of Lucky Harrison and all the other crews who had sacrificed everything to save Earth. They had proved that courage and ingenuity could triumph over even the most advanced technology. But as he watched the Benzite ships vanishing into deep space, Jesse couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the end, or merely the beginning of humanity's journey to the stars? And what other lessons from the past might help guide their way forward? The answers to these questions would have to wait. For now, Earth had won its freedom, not through superior technology, but through the timeless qualities that had always defined humanity: determination, adaptability, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the old ways were still the best ways. Echoes of victory. 6 months after Operation Phantom Phoenix, Jesse Porter stood at the newly erected memorial wall outside Fort Harrison. The black granite surface reflected the Montana sunrise, each name etched in gold, the crews who had flown into space knowing they might never return. His fingers traced Lucky Harrison's name, remembering the old pilot's final transmission. I thought I'd find you here, Maya Rodriguez said softly, approaching with a cup of coffee. She'd traded her vintage radio headset for a Colonel's Eagles. The worldwide reconstruction effort had led to rapid promotions for many veterans of the Benzite War. Just paying my respects, Jesse replied, accepting the coffee. Hard to believe it's been 6 months already. The world's changed, Maya agreed. Everyone has. Did you see the latest from Dr. Rossi's team? Jesse nodded. Scientists worldwide had been studying the wreckage of Benzite technology that had crashed to Earth during their hasty retreat. Dr. Elena Rossi led the research effort, combining the insights gained from alien tech with the proven reliability of older human engineering. Hybrid shields, he said. Energy fields that can stop both energy weapons and physical projectiles. She says we could have working prototypes within a year. Lieutenant Chen, now Major Chen, joined them at the memorial. His Thompson submachine gun, the same one he'd carried throughout the war, hung in a place of honor in the base museum. It's not just military technology, he added. The Benzite defeat changed how we think about progress itself. He was right. The war had sparked a global renaissance in engineering and design. Modern technology was being reimagined with an emphasis on reliability and simplicity. Companies were producing computers with mechanical backup systems, vehicles that could function without electronics, and communication networks that combined digital efficiency with analog resilience. Colonel Hawkins wants to see us, Maya said after a moment of reflection. Something about the new defense initiative. In the command center, now rebuilt with a careful balance of modern and traditional technology, Colonel Hawkins waited with several high-ranking officials. The tactical displays showed a mix of satellite feeds and old-style radar plots. Redundancy had become the new standard in military operations. Glad you could join us, Hawkins said, his hair a little grayer but his eyes as sharp as ever. We've received some interesting intelligence from our deep space monitoring stations. The main screen displayed a series of images showing distant galaxies. The Benzites aren't the only ones out there, Hawkins continued. And our victory hasn't gone unnoticed. Other spacefaring races are taking an interest in Earth. Hostile? Jesse asked, studying the images. Unknown, Maya replied, pulling up intercepted transmissions. But they're definitely curious. The species that drove off the Benzite Empire with primitive weapons has become something of a legend in galactic circles. Which is why, Hawkins said, we're implementing Project Janus. 2 phases, one looking to the future, one remembering the past. We're going to build Earth's first interstellar defense force, but we're doing it our way. The screens shifted to show new designs, spacecraft that combined advanced alien technology with tried-and-true human engineering. Hybrid drives that could switch between antimatter propulsion and chemical rockets. Weapons systems that incorporated both energy beams and conventional projectiles. We're calling them the Phoenix-class vessels, Chen explained, pulling up the schematics. Each one carries a complement of both modern and vintage weapons. No one will ever catch us defenseless again. But the changes weren't just military in nature. The Benzite War had taught humanity valuable lessons about resilience and adaptation. Cities were being rebuilt with an emphasis on self-sufficiency. Schools added mandatory courses in mechanical engineering and basic survival skills. Museums became living repositories of knowledge, their artifacts maintained in working condition rather than simply displayed. The Benzites thought they were superior because they had the most advanced technology, Jesse mused, remembering those first desperate battles. But they forgot something important: technology is just a tool. It's the human spirit that matters most. Maya's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. The Deep Space Monitoring Network had detected something new, a massive object approaching from the direction of Alpha Centauri. But this time, Earth was ready. Vintage air raid sirens stood ready alongside quantum early warning systems. Soldiers trained with both pulse rifles and old-school firearms. Whatever's coming, Hawkins said, studying the readings, they'll find us prepared. Not just with technology, but with the wisdom of our past and the strength of our unity. Jesse looked around at his companions, Maya with her blend of traditional and modern communication skills, Chen's tactical brilliance that bridged old and new warfare, Dr. Rossi's innovative fusion of alien and human science. They represented humanity's greatest strength, the ability to learn from history while reaching for the stars. The memorial outside caught the last rays of sunset, the names of the fallen glowing like beacons. They had sacrificed everything to teach humanity its most important lesson, that true strength comes not from blindly embracing the new or stubbornly clinging to the old, but from understanding when to use each. As the unknown object drew closer, Jesse felt a familiar weight settle onto his shoulders. But this time, it wasn't just the M1 Garand that had helped save humanity. It was the weight of responsibility, to honor the past, embrace the future, and protect the delicate balance between them. "Sound the alert," he said, his voice steady. "But this time, we show them everything we've got, old and new together." As klaxons began to sound across the globe, humanity stood ready. They had faced the stars and survived, not by abandoning their history or rejecting progress, but by finding strength in both. The legacy of steel had become something greater, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity, courage, and the wisdom to know that every era had its lessons to teach. The future beckoned, full of challenges and possibilities. But whatever it held, Earth would face it as they had faced the Benzites, with one hand holding fast to the lessons of the past, and the other reaching boldly toward tomorrow's dawn.